Get off this dock. You don't belong here. That's what my HOA neighbor Karen screamed at me. While I was sitting on my own dock, she marched over, waving rules and threats, claiming she could evict me from property I built and owned. But what Karen didn't realize was that her boat was illegally tied to my dock. And within the hour, the rules she loved so much were about to backfire in the most humiliating way possible. Get off this dock. You don't belong here. Those were the exact words that yanked me out of what should have been a perfect Sunday morning. I was sitting on my dock with a steaming cup of coffee, enjoying the cool breeze that carried the faint smell of pine trees and fresh water. The lake rippled gently under the sunlight, and the only sound was the soft splash of waves brushing against the wood. It was my sanctuary until Karen showed up. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, stormed down like she owned the entire lake. Arms crossed tight, lips pursed, eyes narrow with entitlement. She looked at me as if I was some kind of trespasser. And then came the demand, pack up and leave, from my own dock. Now, I'd had my fair share of HOA drama before. I'd received letters claiming my lawn was half an inch too tall, emails lecturing me about the unapproved shade of my mailbox, and once, believe it or not, a warning because my garbage bins were visible for 10 whole minutes after collection day. It was always petty, but this time, this was personal. Telling me I couldn't sit on the dock I built, paid for, and legally owned? This wasn't just HOA harassment. This was war. I took a deep breath, reminded myself not to rise to her bait. Calmly, I said, Karen, this is my dock. You have no right to evict me. But calm never worked with her. She thrived on chaos, on making people feel small. She smirked, pulled out her phone, and in her most smug tone declared that she was filing complaint. According to her, I'd be fined and removed within the hour. Her words echoed louder than the waves, but as I watched her typing furiously on her phone, I noticed something she clearly hadn't thought about. Right there, tied snugly to the side of my dock, was her boat. Not just any boat, either. It was her pride and joy, a shiny, overpriced pontoon that she bragged about at every HOA meeting. She loved showing it off, talking about the parties she'd host, the cruises she'd take. And yet, here it was, parked on my dock without permission. At that moment, a bold idea sparked in my mind. Karen had always used HOA rules as weapons against everyone else, but the truth was she barely followed them herself. Her boat was a perfect example. According to the HOA bylaws, yes, the same one she threw in everyone's face, every boat had to be registered, approved, and parked only in designated slips. Hers? Not registered, not approved, and definitely not parked in the right place. The more I thought about it, the funnier it became. She was trying to kick me off my own dock while her boat was illegally squatting on it. The hypocrisy was too good to ignore. I said, You know, Karen, maybe you should worry less about me and more about where your boat is tied up. She scoffed, laughed in my face, and spat back, My boat is fine. You're not. Then she spun on her heel and marched away, no doubt off to brag about her little victory. But she had no idea that her so-called victory had just set her up for the biggest defeat of her life. As soon as she disappeared, I pulled out my own phone. I opened the HOA bylaws, the ones I've been forced to memorize over years of living under Karen's tyranny. And there it was, plain as day. Any property left unauthorized on another member's dock may be considered abandoned and subject to removal by the dock owner. I grinned. The rules she loved so much were about to turn against her. I snapped photo after photo. Her boat tied to my dock, the registration numbers missing, the date and time stamped in bold. I even recorded a short video narrating the situation just in case she tried to twist the story later, which I knew she would. Then, with all the evidence ready, I made a call. A local towing service specialized in watercraft removal, and when I explained the situation, they were more than happy to help. Within 20 minutes, they promised, a crew would arrive. While I waited, I sat back down, sipped the last of my coffee, and let the waves carry my anticipation. For once, I wasn't dreading Karen's wrath. I was counting the minutes until justice showed up. And justice came, loud, bright, and beautiful. The tow crew pulled in with a small barge and heavy-duty equipment. I waved them over and pointed to pontoon. That's the one. Belongs to a neighbor who's illegally parking on my dock. They nodded, pulled out paperwork for me to sign, and got to work. Chains clinked. Motors roared, and slowly, Karen's beloved boat was unhooked and prepared for towing. That's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of furious heels clacking against the dock. Karen, clipboard in hand, face red as a tomato, ready to shove another complaint down my throat. But when she saw her boat being detached, her jaw dropped so hard I swear the fish in the lake heard it. "What are you doing with my boat?" she shrieked. I stood tall, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "Karen, according to the HOA rules you love so much, your boat is illegally parked. And by those same rules, I now have the right to seize it." Her face twisted with rage. She yelled at the tow crew, threatened to call the HOA president, even dialed the police. But it was useless. I had evidence, the bylaws, and the paperwork all signed. The crew kept working as if she wasn't even there. Within minutes, her prized possession was hauled away, leaving only an empty spot beside my dock. The neighborhood? They'd been watching the whole thing. From their decks and windows, people who had suffered years of Karen's nitpicking finally got front row seats to her downfall. Some even clapped as the tow barge pulled away. The aftermath was delicious. The HOA president called me later that week, apologizing for Karen's behavior. Turns out, she'd been abusing her position for years, and my report was a nail in her coffin. She was fined heavily, stripped of her so-called authority, and warned that any further stunts could result in legal action. As for me, I reclaimed my peace. No more surprise visits. No more empty threats. No more fake evictions. I sat on my dock the next weekend, coffee in hand, watching the waves without a single ounce of stress. Karen tried to evict me from my dock, but that same hour, I seized her boat. Karen loved to act like she was the queen of the neighborhood. If you've ever dealt with an HOA Karen, you know exactly the type I'm talking about. Someone who struts around as if the rules were written by her and for everyone else to suffer under. She thrived on control, on making people uncomfortable, and on reminding everyone that she was the loudest voice in every room. But here's the thing about Karen. The truth was she barely followed the rules herself. She wasn't a queen, she was a hypocrite. Her boat was a perfect example. According to HOA guidelines, every single watercraft had to be registered with the board, approved, and kept only in designated slips. The rules were strict. No exceptions, no special treatment. But Karen? She thought she was above all that. Her shiny pontoon boat was completely unregistered, tied up right on my property line, and never once approved by anyone. It was sitting there like a smug reminder of her arrogance, bold, blatant, and untouchable. Or so she thought. So while she stood there barking orders at me like some drill sergeant, threatening me with fines and eviction notices, I couldn't help but notice the irony. She was trying to kick me off my own dock, property I paid for, maintained, and legally owned, all while her boat was illegally parked on it. The hypocrisy was almost laughable. Almost. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "You know, Karen, maybe you should worry less about me and more about where your boat is tied up." She froze for a moment, then burst out laughing, a loud, mocking laugh that carried across the lake. She leaned forward, smirk plastered across her face, and said, "My boat is fine. You're not." That laugh, it wasn't just annoying. It was the last straw. I'd put up with Karen's antics for years. Snide comments about my lawn, petty complaints about my mailbox color, letters about how my trash bins weren't hidden fast enough after pickup. Every week, it was something new, something ridiculous, something meant to remind me she thought she had power over me. But this, trying to evict me from my own dock while her boat squatted there illegally, this was too much. And that smug laugh of hers lit a fire in me. I didn't respond with anger. I didn't yell. Instead, I smiled. Because in that moment, I realized something. Karen had just handed me all the ammunition I needed. She thought she was winning. She thought her threats and her fake authority could push me off my own property. But she didn't know what I knew. She didn't know that her boat, sitting there tied up, was about to become her downfall. The moment she walked away, still chuckling to herself, I pulled out my phone, I opened the HOA bylaws, the same one she shoved in everyone's face when she wanted to feel powerful. And there it was, clear as day. Any unauthorized property parked on another member's dock may be considered abandoned and subject to removal by the dock owner. I nearly laughed myself. Karen had built her little kingdom on rules, but she never thought they'd come back to bite her. So I went to work. I snapped photos of her boat tied to my dock, close-ups of the missing registration numbers, wide shots showing it was clearly on my property. I even took a short video explaining the situation, just in case she tried to twist the truth later. I knew her game. She'd spin any story to make herself the victim. Not this time. Then I made a call. A local towing service specialized in watercraft removal, and when I explained the situation, they said they'd be there within the hour. It was poetic. She wanted me gone within the hour? Fine. Within the same hour, her boat would be gone instead. When the tow crew arrived, I felt a surge of satisfaction. They pulled up with a small barge, heavy chains, and equipment built for exactly this. I waved them over and pointed at the pontoon. That's the one, I said. Belongs to a neighbor, illegally parked on my dock. They nodded, pulled out the paperwork for me to sign, and got to work. Chains clinked. The equipment roared to life, and Karen's prized possession began its slow, humiliating removal. Right on cue, I heard the sound of angry footsteps pounding the dock. Karen, clipboard in hand, face red as a fire hydrant, ready to unleash another storm of complaints. But when her eyes locked on the side of her boat being unhooked, her expression shifted from fury to shock. "What are you doing with my boat?" she screeched, her voice cracking with panic. I turned to her calmly, savoring the moment. "Karen, according to the HOA rules, your boat is illegally parked. And by those same rules, I now have the right to seize it." Her jaw dropped. She tried everything, yelling at the tow crew, threatening to call the HOA president, even dialing the police. But it was useless. The tow crew had the signed paperwork, and I had the photos, videos, and bylaws on my side. Her voice grew shriller with every second, but the crew didn't flinch. They finished their job, secured the boat, and pulled away, leaving nothing but empty space beside my dock. The best part? The neighborhood had been watching the entire show. From decks, porches, and windows, people who had endured years of Karen's harassment got to witness her greatest defeat. I heard laughter. I saw smiles. A few neighbors even clapped as the boat disappeared down the lake. For once, Karen wasn't the queen of anything. She was just a hypocrite who got burned by her own rules. In the days that followed, word spread fast. The HOA president reached out to me, apologizing for Karen's behavior and thanking me for bringing the issue to light. Turns out, Karen had been bending the rules for herself for years, and my evidence was a final straw. She was fined heavily, stripped of her authority, and warned that any future stunts could have serious consequences. As for me, I reclaimed my peace. No more fake threats, no more clipboard inspections, no more smug laughter. I spent the next weekend back on my dock, coffee in hand, watching the waves roll by in silence. Karen had tried to evict me from my own dock, but that same hour, I seized her boat. The moment she turned her back to storm off, I knew exactly what to do. Her words still rang in my ears, her smug declaration that I'd be fined and removed within the hour. She thought she had me cornered, but what she didn't realize was that she had just made the biggest mistake of her HOA career. I pulled out my phone, hand steady but adrenaline pumping through my veins. I scrolled straight to the HOA bylaws, the same thick document Karen always weaponized against the rest of us. Normally, reading through those rules felt like punishment, but today it was a gold mine. There it was, in plain black and white. Any unauthorized property left on another member's dock may be considered abandoned and subject to removal by the dock owner. I couldn't help but grin. The rules were crystal clear. Karen's boat, sitting there like a shiny silver trophy, was illegally tied to my dock. Not just any dock, either. My dock, the one I had paid to build, paid to maintain, and legally owned. And now, according to the very bylaws she lived to quote, I had the right to seize it. It felt poetic. For years, Karen had terrorized the neighborhood with her clipboard and her endless stream of complaints. She fined people for leaving Christmas lights up too long, shamed neighbors for having trash bins visible, and once even wrote up an elderly man because his shed door was painted the wrong shade of beige. She used the rules like weapons, sharp, cruel, and selective, but the truth was, she never thought those same rules could be used against her. Until now, I snapped picture after picture of her boat. Wide shots, close-ups, angles that left no room for doubt. The lack of registration sticker was clear. The ropes tying it to my dock were clear. The date and time stamp glowed proudly in the corner of every shot. For good measure, I recorded a short video narrating exactly what was happening. If Karen tried to twist the story, I'd have airtight proof. And then came the fun part. I called a towing service that specialized in watercraft. The guy on the other end of the line sounded almost amused when I explained the situation. Illegally parked boat on your dock? Yeah, we handle that all the time, he said. Within 20 minutes, he promised. A crew would be on their way. 20 minutes. That was it. Karen thought she'd scare me off. But in reality, the countdown to her humiliation had already started. I sat back down on my dock, sipping the last of my coffee, and let the anticipation wash over me. The lake was calm, the sky bright, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't dreading Karen's interference. I was looking forward to it. When the tow crew arrived, it was like watching a cavalry roll in. They pulled up in a sturdy work barge equipped with winches, chains, and all the gear needed to haul away stubborn watercraft. Two men hopped out, greeted me politely, and asked me to point out the offending boat. I didn't hesitate. I gestured toward Karen's gleaming pontoon, still bobbing arrogantly against my dock. That's the one, I said. Belongs to my neighbor. Completely unregistered. Illegally parked. They nodded, pulled out paperwork for me to sign, and got to work. The sound of metal chains clinking, the roar of machinery, and the creak of wood under the shifting weight. It was the sweetest music I'd ever heard. And then, right on cue, came the shrill, unmistakable sound of Karen's voice. She stormed back down the dock, heels clattering like gunfire, face red and twisted with fury. Clipboard clutched in one hand, cell phone in the other. She was ready for another round of intimidation. But this time, the sight that greeted her nearly made her jaw hit the lake. Her boat, her pride and joy, was being unhooked from my dock, chains tightening around it as the crew prepared to haul it away. "What are you doing with my boat?" she screamed, her voice cracking with panic. I turned to her slowly, letting the moment sink in. "Karen, according to the HOA rules, your boat is illegally parked on my dock, and by those same rules, I have every right to seize it." Her eyes went wide, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. For once, she was speechless. Then came the meltdown. She shouted at the tow crew, demanding they stop. She waved her clipboard in the air like it was some kind of badge of authority. She even pulled out her phone and dialed the HOA president, her voice shrill and desperate. But none of it mattered. The tow crew ignored her. They had my signature, my evidence, and the law on their side. Slowly but surely, they lifted her precious boat, securing it tightly to their barge. By now, neighbors had gathered. Some watched from their decks, others from their porches, whispering and chuckling as the drama unfolded. Everyone in the community had their own horror story about Karen. Everyone had been on the receiving end of her petty harassment, and now they were getting front row seats to her downfall. When the boat finally pulled away, Karen let out a scream that could have shattered glass. But behind her, I could hear the sound of clapping. My neighbors, tired, quiet victims of her reign, were applauding. For the first time in years, Karen wasn't the one dishing out punishment. She was the one being humiliated. The aftermath was even sweeter. The HOA president called me the next day. Not only did he confirm that Karen had been in the wrong, but he also admitted she'd been bending the rules for years. My evidence was the nail in the coffin. She was fined heavily for her violations, stripped of her so-called authority, and warned that any future stunts could bring legal consequences. Karen avoided me for weeks after that. No more surprise inspections, no more threats, no more smug laughter. It was like she'd vanished. As for me, I reclaimed my peace. The next weekend, I sat on my dock again, coffee in hand, watching the waves roll by. No interruptions. No harassment. Just quiet. Karen had tried to evict me from my dock. But that same hour, I seized her boat. When the tow crew arrived, I didn't hesitate. I pointed straight at the gleaming pontoon tied snugly to the side of my dock. That's the one, I said firmly. Belongs to a neighbor who's illegally parking it on my dock. The men didn't ask unnecessary questions. They'd heard it all before. Neighbors fighting over space, HOA drama spilling onto the water, and entitled owners thinking the rules didn't apply to them. All they needed was proof, and I had plenty: photos, videos, the bylaws themselves. With my signature on the paperwork, they got to work immediately. Chains rattled. The barge engine growled, and slowly, methodically, they began unhooking the boat. And that's when the storm arrived. Karen came marching down the dock like a hurricane in human form. Clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. She was ready to write me up, find me, and make another example out of me. Her heels pounded against the wood like war drums, and her voice carried before she even reached us. But when her eyes landed on the scene, her prize pontoon being unhooked from my dock, her jaw nearly hit the water. "What are you doing with my boat?" she shrieked, voice cracking in disbelief. I turned slowly, savoring the moment. For once, she wasn't the one with the upper hand. For once, she was the one being blindsided. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Karen, according to the HOA rules you love so much, your boat is illegally parked. And by those same rules, I now have the right to seize it. You wanted me off my own dock? Well, I'm taking you off of it instead." Her face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before, somewhere between fury and panic. She stomped closer, clipboard shaking in her hand. "You can't do this. This is theft. This is harassment," she screamed, trying to insert herself between the crew and her boat. But the tow men didn't flinch. They'd seen meltdowns like this before. With calm, practiced efficiency, they finished untying ropes clipped on the heavy chains and started securing the boat for removal. Karen's outrage grew louder. She whipped out her phone and called the HOA president, shrieking into the receiver about illegal seizures and disrespectful neighbors. When that didn't work, she dialed the police, pacing the dock like a caged animal as she tried to get someone, anyone, to stop what was happening. But the truth was simple. The law was on my side. I had the bylaws. I had the photos. I had the dates and times documented. And most importantly, the crew had official paperwork signed by me, the dock's legal owner. Karen's tantrum wasn't enough to stop the inevitable. Her screams echoed across the lake, bouncing off the calm water. But something else was happening, too. From every corner of the neighborhood, people were watching. Doors opened. Neighbors stepped onto decks, leaning against railings with wide smiles. Some held coffee cups, others phones, clearly recording every second of Karen's downfall. For years, everyone had been forced to endure her tyranny. She fined people for lawn decorations, scolded kids for riding bikes too close to the wrong curb, and even tried to ban a neighbor from hanging wind chimes because she claimed the sound was offensive. She ruled with an iron fist, and most people were too afraid or too tired to fight back. But now they were witnessing her greatest defeat, and the satisfaction was written all over their faces. The tow crew finished their work, tightened chains, and began slowly hauling the pontoon away. Karen's voice cracked as she screamed, "You'll pay for this. You'll regret this." But the only thing being paid for was her arrogance. Her precious boat, the one she bragged about at every HOA meeting, the one she used to host exclusive little parties, was now being towed down the lake like a repossessed car. The sound of laughter started drifting across the water, not from me, but from the neighbors who had finally gotten the justice they'd been waiting for. For once, Karen wasn't in control. She was humiliated, and it was all happening in broad daylight, in front of the very people she'd spent years tormenting. By the time the tow barge disappeared around the bend, Karen's rage had dissolved into something else. Defeat. She stood frozen on the dock, clipboard dangling uselessly at her side, her voice finally gone hoarse from shouting. The neighbors who had gathered began to drift back to their homes. some chuckling, some clapping, all of them buzzing with the story they'd be telling for years. Karen turned on me, her glare sharper than ever, but she didn't say a word. She couldn't. For once, she had no power, no authority, no rules to hide behind. She stormed off in silence, heels clacking furiously against the dock. The aftermath was even sweeter. The HOA president called me the very next day. He apologized on behalf of the board, admitting that Karen had been bending and breaking rules for years. My evidence had been the nail in the coffin. She was fined heavily for her violations, stripped of her so-called authority, and told in no uncertain terms that if she pulled another stunt like that, legal action would follow. Karen disappeared from the spotlight after that. No more surprise visits. No more fake evictions. No more smug laughter. It was like the queen had been dethroned, and the neighborhood could finally breathe again. As for me, I reclaimed my peace. I sat on my dock the next weekend, coffee in hand, watching the waves lap gently against the wood. No interruptions. No shouting. Just quiet. Word spread through the community like wildfire. By that evening, practically everyone on the lake had heard about Karen's meltdown. Neighbors who usually kept to themselves were suddenly coming over just to talk about it. Some brought beer, others just came with wide grins, shaking their heads in disbelief. For years, Karen had been the terror of the HOA, the self-appointed queen who thought every blade of grass, every mailbox, every trash can placement had to meet her approval. She had written complaint letters about Christmas decorations being too tacky. She fined a family because their kids' bikes were left near the driveway for longer than HOA guidelines allowed. She even once told an elderly veteran that his American flag was not the right size for the neighborhood. People whispered about how miserable she made life, but nobody had ever really stood up to her. But that day, that day was different. Karen had been humiliated in front of everyone. The sight of her shrieking on my dock, watching helplessly as her precious pontoon was hauled away, became instant neighborhood legend. Folks compared it to a scene out of a sitcom, like watching the villain finally get exactly what they deserved. Videos started circulating, and I wouldn't be surprised if clips of her screaming ended up as memes in the local Facebook group. For once, people weren't afraid of Karen. They were laughing at her. Later that week, my phone rang. It was the HOA president. Now, let me be clear. I don't usually enjoy HOA phone calls. They usually mean fines, warnings, or some ridiculous notice about community standards. But this one was different. The president's tone was calm, almost embarrassed. He actually apologized on behalf of the board. He admitted that Karen had been bending and breaking rules for herself for a long time. My evidence, the photos, the bylaws, the paperwork with the tow company, had given them the exact proof they needed to finally cut her down to size. She wasn't just fined for the illegal boat. She was stripped of her so-called authority, the power she had lorded over us like a crown. And the board gave her a final warning. If she ever tried another stunt like that, she'd face serious legal action, not just HOA discipline. For the first time ever, the HOA wasn't defending Karen. They were shutting her down. And you know what? The peace that followed was priceless. No more surprise visits to my property. No more angry clipboard confrontations on my dock. No more empty threats about fines, lawsuits, or evictions. Karen disappeared from the spotlight almost overnight. She stopped patrolling the neighborhood like a guard dog. She stopped sending those ridiculous mass emails about violations. It was as if she'd been knocked off her throne, and without her crown, she had no more power to bully anyone. The neighborhood started to feel normal, friendly even. People who had been keeping their heads down for years suddenly started chatting again. Kids rode their bikes without worrying about Karen snapping photos. Families decorated their yards for holidays without fear of a nastygram showing up in the mailbox. And me? I finally got to enjoy the quiet. That next Sunday, I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, walked down to my dock, and sat right where the whole fiasco began. The sun glittered on the water. The breeze carried the faint laughter of kids playing down the shore. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel that tension in the air, the tension of waiting for Karen to appear with a new complaint. Instead, it was just me, my dock, and the lake. Exactly how it should have been all along. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and smiled. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen had tried to weaponize the HOA rules against me, demanding that I leave my own property. But in the end, those same rules, the ones she claimed to live by, ended up sinking her instead. Sometimes the sweetest justice isn't fighting fire with fire. It's letting people burn themselves with the very matches they tried to light under you. And in Karen's case, she tried to evict me from my dock. But that same hour, I seized her boat. And that's how the neighborhood's biggest bully lost her boat, using the very rules she tried to use against me. Honestly, it was the most satisfying justice I've ever experienced. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps more people find these videos. And if you want more crazy HOA and revenge stories just like this one, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next upload. Trust me, the next story is even wilder.